This issue of the Digital Atlas takes us to Tanzania. Officially known as the United Republic of Tanzania. It spans 945,000 square kilometers, roughly equivalent to 28 Hainan Islands. Zanzibar covers 2,657 square kilometers. While the nation's population of 65.44 million is approximately 6.2 times that of Hainan province. Bordered by Kenya and Uganda to the north, Rwanda, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo to the west, Zambia, Malawi, and Mozambique to the south, and facing the Indian Ocean to the east. If you're playing Civilization, capturing this city-state grants bonuses for cinnamon and cloves. In reality, it boasts numerous natural wonders. Africa's highest peak, Kilimanjaro, stands here. Half of Africa's largest lake, Lake Victoria, lies within its borders. And Lake Tanganyika and Lake Malawi form its borders with the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Malawi. Beyond this, the Great Rift Valley Earth's scar stretching from the Red Sea to Mozambique cuts right through central Tanzania. Simply put, it sits at the crossroads of inland resources and maritime access. Step westward, and you reach the Congo Basin and Zambia. Step eastward, and you find sea routes. This nation has always been an essential stop on routes designed by others, yet it has rarely been able to control its own destiny. This region is one of humanity's cradles, with the northern Olduvai Gorge yielding hominid remains dating back approximately 2 million years. Traveling north along Tanzania's coast reveals a cultural corridor known as the Swahili Coast. At the 1885 Berlin Conference, Europe's industrial powers established rules for dividing Africa. Britain and Germany partitioned East Africa. German East Africa became Tanganyika, while British East Africa evolved into modern-day Kenya. But who would see Zanzibar Island? In 1896, the British fought the shortest war in history, lasting just 38 minutes, to expel the German-backed Sultan and install their own puppet ruler, thereby securing control over Zanzibar. After the Germans took control of Tanzania, they built roads and developed Dar es Salaam. But they were too eager, forcibly seizing land and labor, which led to the Mokima uprising in the southern regions. Maki means water in Swahili. In 1905, a local religious leader claimed that the water in his hands could turn German bullets into water, and that people would be immune to bullets if they rubbed it on themselves. Amid this extreme atmosphere, over 20 ethnic groups rallied to the call, charging German strongholds armed with spears, curved swords, and scarce firearms. The outcome was predictable. Faith could not withstand Maxim machine guns. The German scorched earth policy triggered a devastating famine, claiming over 100,000 lives and reducing the entire southern region to its primitive state. To this day, Tanzania's northern and southern regions remain developmentally imbalanced. In contrast, Britain ruled Zanzibar through its Sudanese puppet regime, maintaining a fully established exploitation system that required no direct intervention. After Germany's collapse in World War I, German East Africa was partitioned. Belgium acquired Rwanda and Burundi. Portugal gained Mozambique, and Britain secured Tanganyika. As seasoned colonizers, the British employed more nuanced tactics. They co-opted indigenous elites as proxies to control the masses, upgraded Germany's existing infrastructure, invested in education and healthcare to combat disease, and expanded wheat cultivation. However, their primary interests remained centered in Kenya, treating Tanganyika merely as a raw materials depot. During World War II, 100,000 Tanzanians fought for the Allies, and the country served as a vital food supply base. The war sparked awakening. After World War II ended, the wave of national liberation began, but the British were reluctant to let go. Deeply in debt from the war, they sought to extract more money from the colonies. The government seized 12,000 square kilometers of land to grow peanuts for margarine production, even deploying 100,000 veterans to form a peanut army. The outcome: they failed to account for local environmental conditions and rainfall patterns. The project was rushed into implementation, consuming £36 million over 5 years, only to end in utter chaos. That was £36 million in 1950. The local population suffered immensely and became utterly determined to fight for their independence. Julius Nyerere, born in 1922 into a chieftain family, received his education in British schools and converted to Catholicism. In 1943, he wrote to a newspaper advocating that Africa should follow a socialist path. He then went to study in Britain, further enriching his political knowledge. Upon returning home, he became a rural teacher, cycling through villages to deliver speeches urging national consciousness, advocating the abandonment of tribalism, and strengthening Tanzanian identity. Because he did not advocate violent revolution and carried no pro-Soviet label, the British accepted him. In 1960, he was elected chief minister of the colony. In 1961, Tanganyika formally gained independence. At this juncture, Tanganyika appeared to be a relatively stable case of independence free from war, ethnic strife or coups. However, neighboring Zanzibar was a ticking time bomb. In stark contrast to mainland Tanzania, where black Africans held power and independence was achieved peacefully, Zanzibar remained a feudal society where Arab nobility exploited the black population. Leftist, Pan-Arab and Pan-Africanist movements all set their sights on this small island. The British felt they could no longer contain the situation. In 1963, they directly handed this highly unstable structure back to the Arabs. Elections in the Sultanate were organized strictly along ethnic lines. Surprisingly, the Arab party representing the minority emerged victorious. This naturally enraged the black population. While their mainland brethren had achieved liberation, their oppressors remained unchanged. Black party leaders took refuge in Tanganyika, plotting their resistance. On January 12, 1964, hundreds of poorly armed black militiamen stormed the capital, overthrowing the Sultan. The Sultanate government collapsed overnight. In the ensuing chaos, enraged blacks began settling scores with the colonizers, looting homes, massacring, raping. No one knows the exact death toll. Estimates range from 2,000 to 20,000 during that time. A young man named Kernia fled Zanzibar and eventually reached Britain as a refugee. Drawing from this experience, he studied the wars and refugee crises stemming from colonialism, continuously producing literary works depicting the lives of refugees who spent their entire existence battling exile and defeat. In 2021, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. After the revolution, Karum, leader of the Black Party, returned to become president. To stabilize society, he secretly contacted Tanganyikan police forces to land and expel the mob leaders. On April 26, 1964, Nyerere and Karum announced the union of Tanganyika and Zanzibar. Combining Tan from Tanganyika and Zan from Zanzibar, they formed the nation's new name, Tanzania. Zanzibar retained full autonomy in all areas except defense, foreign affairs, postal services, and civil aviation. The Zanzibar leader retained the title of president and automatically became first vice president of the united government. The ruling parties of both regions merged to form the Tanzanian Revolutionary Party. On October 29, 1964, the United Republic of Tanzania was formally established. Nyerere was a puritanical socialist, approachable, incorruptible, and dedicated to public service. He often walked through rural villages to inspect conditions, earning the respectful title Mwalimu, meaning teacher. He believed it was better for everyone to be moderately poor than for a few to be extremely wealthy while the majority lived in abject poverty. In 1967, Nyerere issued the Arusha Declaration, proposing Ujamaa socialism. Ujamaa means togetherness. His blueprint envisioned this: the state would control the economic arteries to prevent resource outflow. Grassroots communities would implement Ujamaa villages, communes emphasizing self-reliance, minimizing foreign capital dependence to avoid external manipulation, combating corruption, ostentatious wealth and privilege, with all decisions made in the name of the people. The vision was noble, but implementation proved challenging. For third world nations, money and manpower are paramount. Caution, no matter how extreme, is warranted. Money equates to foreign exchange, yet with underdeveloped domestic industries, export opportunities are scarce. One must simultaneously appease entrenched interests and outdated industries while nurturing new ventures. This transition demands measured steps. Overreach risks catastrophic failure. Human resources are talent. During colonial times, black people were confined to menial labor. At independence, Lacking wartime experience, there was no opportunity to train organizations and cadres. Once the whites withdrew, chaos ensued. No matter how good the ideas from above, implementation below was extremely difficult. The Ujamaa communes were initially established to facilitate the construction of irrigation canals, schools, and clinics, where people would help each other. With literacy and education, this aspect did indeed expand rapidly, and land consolidation did not occur. However, by the mid-1970s, forced demolitions and construction projects at the grassroots level, coupled with misguided production directives, caused agricultural output to decline rather than rise, while prices skyrocketed. Government price controls further depressed grain prices, harming farmers and fueling a black market. By the mid-1980s, export revenues from cash crops had halved compared to the 1970s. Factories lacked foreign exchange to import raw materials, leading to urban shortages and long queues. This environment fostered a political habit in Tanzania. The state favored impulsive planning, while the market always found ways to survive in the cracks. If you ever negotiate projects in Tanzania, you'll discover that documents are idealistic, while execution is pragmatic. The most renowned Ujamaa project, familiar to many Chinese, is the Tanzania-Zambia Railway. In 1967, Tanzania, Zambia, and China agreed to build a railway for newly independent Zambia, bypassing white-controlled South Africa and Rhodesia to transport copper ore to Dar es Salaam port in Tanzania. Nyerere envisioned the railway corridor as a new economic zone, planning numerous Ujamaa villages along its route. Construction began in 1970 and opened in 1975, spanning 1,860 kilometers. China provided nearly 1 billion yuan in interest-free loans and dispatched nearly 50,000 construction workers, 64 of whom lost their lives on the front lines. I once read a story about Wang Xingguo, a man from Taixing who volunteered for the railway project. His family was reluctant to let him go, especially since his child was only 3 years old. Wang Xingguo explained, "As a cadre and party member, I must lead by example." He later wrote an article articulating his resolve. Citing his teacher's words, China should make greater contributions to humanity. Later, while constructing Iran's G2 tunnel, he was caught in a cave-in. Despite rescue efforts, he died on the front lines at age 35. To this day, whenever Chinese officials visit Tanzania, they pay their respects at the Chinese-assisted cemetery. Regrettably, this monumental project never fully realized its potential. First, joint management by Tanzania and Zaire led to endless bureaucratic wrangling. Focusing on Tanzania domestically, under the Ujamaa system, foreign exchange shortages meant insufficient funds to procure spare parts and locomotives. Bureaucracy and the collective pot system led to extremely low efficiency, causing trains to run slower and slower, with delays becoming increasingly frequent. From the 1980s to the 1990s, Namibia and Zimbabwe gained independence, and South Africa ended apartheid. The Tanzam Railway was no longer the sole transit route, and freight volumes plummeted to less than 2% of its design capacity. What was once a politically glorious prestige project became a heavy burden on the books. Later, whenever Tanzania considered any major infrastructure project, the instinctive question arose: could this become another Tanzam Railway? For many of our domestic viewers, Tanzania also evokes memories of the East African Liberation Army, referring to the 1978 Uganda-Tanzania War. The war's glory was matched only by its fiscal toll. Uganda and Tanzania had once enjoyed excellent relations. Nyerere and Uganda's founding father Obote were old comrades in arms from the independence movement. In 1967, Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya even jointly established the East African Community. However, while Obote was abroad on a state visit, his deputy, Idi Amin, staged a coup. Obote was forced into exile in Tanzania, and relations between the two countries rapidly deteriorated. Amin's chaotic domestic policies and growing internal conflicts within Uganda led him to seek an external outlet for the nation's tensions. He formally declared war on Tanzania in 1978. Caught unprepared, Tanzania suffered an initial shock defeat. The entire Kagera region fell within days as Ugandan forces rampaged, burning, killing, and looting. With a population of just 50,000, Kagera saw 8,000 people killed and 40,000 displaced as refugees. The Organization of African Unity OAU, precursor to the African Union, condemned Amin but refused to intervene. With no other option, Nyerere swiftly mobilized the Tanzania Defense Force, repelling the Ugandan invasion within a month. Subsequently, Nyerere convened a United Front conference in Kenya, where various anti-Amin guerrilla groups agreed to set aside differences, undergo joint Tanzanian training, and work together to liberate Uganda. With information tightly controlled across Africa, the international community remained unaware of the conflict. Amin exploited this by traveling to the Middle East, framing the war as a Christian Tanzania invading Muslim Uganda. His propaganda succeeded. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia provided financial backing. The Palestine Liberation Organization dispatched guerrillas. And Libya, under its King of Africa, marched its army southward. But ladies and gentlemen, worse than a makeshift force is a collection of makeshift forces. Before engaging Tanzania, these factions turned on each other, shattering morale. Tanzania ultimately marched straight to the heart of the matter, overthrowing Amin's regime. Not only that, Nyerere took charge of both the killing and the burying, stationing troops in Uganda until order was restored and a new government elected. As outsiders observing the Uganda-Tanzania war, we may view it as a glorious triumph. Yet we must consider the context. Coups, civil wars, and armed conflicts were commonplace in Africa at the time. For one nation to dispatch troops and ultimately overthrow another's government was still remarkably bold. Neighboring countries largely disapproved of Tanzania's actions, leading to a temporary deterioration of its diplomatic relations. Moreover, the war inflicted immense damage on Tanzania, while the prolonged troop deployment further strained the national treasury, consuming roughly 10% of GDP. As global interest rates rose throughout the 1970s, Tanzania's foreign debt ballooned. By the mid-1980s, the Tanzanian economy plunged into a full-blown crisis. Food had to be imported, foreign exchange earnings halved, manufacturing ground to a halt, hyperinflation raged, and people queued for everything. Having won the war but lost the economy, Ujamaa had become an expensive ideal. Nyerere ultimately resigned as president in 1985, citing the need to end the practice of lifelong leadership positions. Though his economic plans largely failed, he set a personal example and laid solid foundations in political culture and society. Unlike other African nations, Tanzania avoided coups, ethnic massacres, armed guerrilla groups, and terrorist organizations. The Revolutionary Party maintained long-term governance without internal factional struggles or the need to overturn previous administrations' policies with each government change. This robust political culture may prove more significant than short-term economic growth. After Nyerere stepped down, Tanzania embarked on its own path of transformation. Facing fiscal pressures, they had little choice but to turn to the IMF and World Bank. Many immediately think, oh no, the American conspiracy is coming, but it's important to note that for many third world countries, even a junior staff member at the IMF represents talent they couldn't find domestically even if they searched high and low. The IMF's prescription is familiar: devalue the currency significantly, relax import restrictions, slash the fiscal deficit, cut subsidies, reduce losses in state-owned enterprises, gradually privatize some SOEs, encourage private sector development, liberalize agricultural prices, and use price signals to stimulate production. This essentially boils down to choosing between prolonged pain or immediate pain. Tanzania chose to swallow the medicine, and the immediate pain began. Soaring prices hit fixed-income groups hard. Layoffs at state-owned enterprises pushed up urban unemployment, and cuts to social service spending led to declining education and healthcare quality, directly igniting social tensions. The ruling party was forced to agree to political reforms, including opening elections to multiple parties. By 2000, agriculture began recovering. Farmers responded more positively to market prices, and the private sector gradually revitalized. Small vendors, private transport, and private factories emerged, propelling Tanzania into a new phase of medium to high growth around 6%. They also identified growth drivers uniquely suited to East Africa: wildlife tourism, gold mining, natural gas, and agricultural exports. Yet new contradictions emerged. For instance, to secure aid, policies had to cater to the sentiments and interests of Western donors. Traditional Ujamaa elites transformed into shareholders or directors of private enterprises, converting political capital into economic capital, giving rise to corruption through the collusion of power and capital. At the national level, economic policy oscillated between state dominance and market dynamism. At the grassroots level, developing tourism often requires expanding hunting grounds and tourist reserves, which necessitates displacing local Maasai communities. This leads to local governments deploying police and rangers to assist developers in forcibly evicting the Maasai. These are painful examples of inevitable challenges during the transition from revolutionary ideals to economic development. No nation can avoid them. Our country has faced similar situations, though the specific circumstances, manifestations, and approaches to resolving conflicts differ. For instance, the Maasai received no relocation compensation, so their second-generation evictees did not prosper but grew enraged. Tanzania's development momentum is strong, with projected growth rates of approximately 5.1% in 2023, 5.7% in 2024, and 6% in 2025. Reports identify it as East Africa's growth engine. Yet in reality, national electricity access remains below 50%. Development is impossible without power. The government's priorities are power generation and road construction. For electricity, the focus is on the Julius Nyerere hydropower project, a long-cherished dream of Nyerere that was abandoned due to funding shortages but is now finally being realized. Led by an Egyptian company, the project involves China Energy Engineering Group in auxiliary construction and turbine installation. Tanzania's total grid-connected capacity currently stands at just 2,000 to 3,000 megawatts. Upon its completion and commissioning in 2025, this hydroelectric plant's 9 units will generate 2,115 megawatts, effectively doubling the nation's power output. Elections risk triggering civil war. Though Ujamaa failed, countless cadres learned from its collapse, establishing a stable political foundation. The Revolutionary Party could maintain long-term control under a majority voting system, ensuring continuity in projects and policies. This allowed for long-term national planning, enabling the design, execution, and implementation of major initiatives. This process cultivated cadres, developed talent, and fostered public trust in the government's ability to deliver tangible results. Yet, stability was not without its surprises. In October 2025, Tanzania held presidential elections. President Hassan has been successfully re-elected. Yet prior to the vote, the main opposition party was disqualified, and its leader imprisoned for inciting election subversion. Following the election, the opposition called for nationwide protests, sparking large-scale demonstrations and riots. The government responded decisively. It cut internet access, deployed military and police forces to suppress the unrest, and imposed a curfew. This illustrates that in an era of waning revolution, economic prioritization, and shifting global systems, surface calm cannot explain everything. Tanzania is neither a paradise where gold lies scattered for the taking nor a chaotic battleground beyond control. It is neither exceptional nor extreme, yet in such times, this very normality becomes profoundly precious. Finally, if you've gained even a little understanding of this world, let's become stronger. Record this moment. Wishing everyone strength. Until next time, until next time, until next time, until next time, until next time.